Hello there. This is our second InnoHUB session, the second day of the program. And we are just starting, right? Because we have so many other sessions planned for you. Let me start with introducing myself. Indeed, I am Eve, Women in AI Ambassador in the Netherlands, founder and managing partner at Evenness, serial entrepreneur, and the initiator of InnoHUB. And maybe you've heard about We Accelerate from the last year. With this form of social learning, virtual learning, I'm able to meet all of you from various parts of the world. Hey, it is exciting, isn't it? So InnoHUB, let me speak a little bit about it before I introduce to you our amazing, inspiring, knowledgeable, wow speaker. I cannot find the right word because Florian Krueger, who is to speak today, he is simply amazing. But to start with InnoHUB, you have signed up for the program. All of you had something for yourself, whether you're a founder or you are in corporate careers and you would like to advance your knowledge to, take the ladder to success faster and more prominently. But you're here to actually nail those skills of open innovation, data, and AI, at the same time create your network. So you see people around you. Do not hesitate to talk with them, discuss things, ask questions, bring up your challenges, offer help, because that's how you build your tribe. And your tribe, who is aware of open innovations, data, and AI, they can also become your colleagues, your partners, and you can grow in a very, very successful way altogether. InnoHUB was brought by Women in AI and Evenness. We wanted to create the momentum, as we call it. It's a momentum for women and also gender non-conforming individuals who have been neglected for some time during the history of times, and now it is our moment to be visible, be featured, and take a step in the prominently in our careers. So InnoHUB is the place for you to gain your skills. And today's session is all about that, understanding AI and data and the way for it of democratizing AI and data. Now, without any further ado, let me introduce to you one and only, the most amazing person, one of the brightest minds in AI and data world, Florian Krueger. He is European Regional Chair for the International Society of Chief Data Officers at MIT Sloan School of Management. And to show our excitement, let's click on that, hit that button C, the key on your keyboard, to clap with your avatar. I see Olga is clapping. Zelia, yes, I see you clap and everyone is clapping. All right, great. So I'm leaving the screen. Florian will take over this one, and may the AI force be with you.
Yay! I heard yay. Thank you very much for the kind words, Eve. I'm very much looking forward to an interactive session. So if you have any questions, there's an option for you to ask questions, as you know, with the queue. Just pop in there. There'll be a few, I think, polls that we're going to do as well. And just interrupt at any point in time. Obviously, it is a very complex topic, democratizing AI and data. And I'd expect a lot of things to be not 100% straightforward and crystal clear. So absolutely no problem. Just ask anytime you want. So today, the task I've been set was to talk about the democratization of AI and data. And it took me a while to wrap my head around what that actually means, because obviously you could tackle that from many angles. And I decided to break it down into three distinct parts and then a summary at the end. So the first bit is that I'm actually going to talk about what does it actually mean, democratization. Then I'm going to do a quick introduction on data science, the use of data, use cases. Afterwards, we'll talk about artificial intelligence and just lay some foundations. And then we'll talk about the macro context, and we're going to provide hopefully some food for thought. I've been around for quite some time now, as it says here, for a little over 20 years, and I'm focused. I'm a business guy, but I've always been very interested in the whole technical side. So after my first degree in insurance economics, I actually did a second degree then in business IT management to better understand how stuff is correlated and what stuff could be used, specifically disruptive tech, for certain business context. And out of that, obviously the underlying thing is data, and came a passion for data, and then out of that came a passion for decentralization, blockchain, and such things, where I set up a few companies in that space. So if you want to connect with me, feel free to reach out. It's linkedin.com/in/Florian. Happy to receive any connection requests. So the working thesis is to truly and fully democratize data and AI basic understanding must unite us. So we need to understand what data and AI really are. We need to build that on a common understanding that everyone knows what we're talking about. So this is not a very advanced session. This is a session where we're trying to really set the scene and unite everybody and find the smallest common denominators between our knowledge bases so that we can actually talk about the same stuff. And I'm lastly trying to do this in layman terms. So I'm trying to use as little semantics as I possibly can and be as simple in the choice as I possibly can, because I believe that you really truly only understand it if you're able to simplify something. So these are the three working theses. Now, if I look at democratization to begin with, there's 3 points to democratization. If you Google it and if you look it up, what it actually means in a political and non-political context, and that means basically upwards control, so sovereignty residing at the lowest level of authority. So basically that everyone has sovereignty and everyone can self-control and self-manage and self-define. That is one of the key principles of democratization. The second part is absolute and utter political equality, that you have no differences, you have no class systems, you have no hierarchies, you have equality. And lastly, you have the social norms and the context, where we as people or we as organizations actually can find ourselves, and that unites these two principles and actually makes them livable, makes them puts them into practice. So these three principles of democratization are something that I want to look a little bit further in, and what that actually means for us in a business context. So if you look at sovereignty, for example, consumer sovereignty is identified or defined as us having the ability to decide, first of all, having the power to choose what we want to spend our money on, and then also influence the goods that we want to buy or the services that we want to consume. So it is not just a one-way street. It is something that you've probably heard before, where somebody's mentioned prosumer models in the past, where you don't have just a consumer, you don't just have a producer, you have a combination of a consumer and producer. You really become a prosumer. You become someone that's an integral part in the ecosystem of any company. So the picture here shows it a little bit, that you have on the one side the typical consumer who just consumes stuff, and on the other side you have someone who also feeds something back into the system. Example for sovereignty is also the question of who owns identity. And as you can imagine, this is a topic that is very hot right now and has been for a number of years. Digital identities are a key component of any data set. Digital identities are very important also in the context of other non-centralized systems that are being set up. And the whole question arises, who should actually own the data? And as you probably heard recently, the UK is now in the process of redefining GDPR, the data privacy regulation side, which is potentially dangerous, but might also have some advantages, because it could be made a little bit more flexible in the sense that you could, for example, allow solutions that are not able to forget information to maintain themselves and to actually continue to exist, which are otherwise non-permitted. So despite the fact that I'm a huge advocate of data privacy, this is something that is an interesting topic to watch out for. Now, who currently your identity is being owned, should be owned by you, but is actually factually owned by the state, by the people that are issuing a passport, by the people that are giving you certain sets of documents. So this is something that is not entirely sovereign, And that is something that I expect to change over time as other systems are coming into place. Now, lastly, you have equality. No, not lastly, as a second point, really, you have equality. And as you can see here, equality in the context of gender equality, for example, is something that is not easily understood, because you may say, well, I don't feel that we're having an equal work environment. Somebody else says, no, it's completely equal. So that's really where you need data. That's where I think data comes into the equation. And in order to democratize data and AI, I think you need to look at the data side of the equality equation. And there's plenty of information out there, and I think that's where it matters, and that's how it correlates to democratization. And then, of course, if you then look further, if you look into AI, for example, many of you may probably have heard about the AI gender bias. So if you look at your usual series, or it doesn't matter which tool it is, whether it's Google or whoever, they're all slightly biased. We've all seen examples where something was asked and that created a certain gender bias, and that is primarily happening because certain labels. Actually, it's typically the human bias which translates into AI, and the reason and how it's done is actually through labels, through errors, lacking information, and then sometimes also the way how that is actually constructed. So equality is not a given. Yeah, and you can, if you can't read that, guys, you can come in closer and you can actually zoom in. Not on my mug, but actually you can zoom in on the screen. I try to keep it rather big, but for the one or other, it might be a little bit too small. So if you click on the screen, you can zoom in on the screen, and then you can read it a little easier. But don't worry, I forgot to say in the beginning, you're all going to receive the presentation slides afterwards, so you can all review it at your own leisure at a later point in time. Yeah. So that's on AI. And then, of course, the whole context, the social systems, the norms that we're experiencing that are basically providing the framework for us to work in a democratized way and in a democratized world, supporting sovereignty and equality is not always, and that maybe I'm slightly biased again on that one, but I haven't seen a truly democratized solution that is centralized. If you believe in the power of the many, if you believe in the power of the crowd, the intelligence of the crowd, then you need to find other ways how you harness information and how you actually democratize ideas and business models. And that is certainly not working if you have one central authority and then everyone else has to adhere to that. The big problem is how you actually create these systems, how you create these, for example, distributed autonomous organizations are an example for this, that are typically found in the decentralized finance space, but not exclusively. So if you find some of these decentralized organizations, they're struggling sometimes with how they actually manage themselves, but there are ways around, and specifically around accountability. And if you retain information about one's actions, one's votes, one's behaviors, and you keep them accountable, because it's not just forgotten, it's something that actually is always going to be in the system, that may be a way around how you actually work on that. As a first brainstorming session, I would really like you to go and have a think about what democratization means to you personally. I'd also like you to think about what you would be willing to sacrifice, and whether you would be willing to sacrifice short-term profits for a more sustainable and democratic system. Because obviously, if you're striving for a better system, you might have to forego some of the immediate opportunities that you'd otherwise have. And which business models or governing principles are ripe for further democratization, and how you would tackle that.
And logic of it, make sure, because that would allow to cover some biased elements, because the really big problem and I guess fear element of algorithms is if it's created by a very specific type of people, they're gonna create them exactly how they think.
You're thinking about AT&T, who wants to create brand awareness, right? And then they want to create a certain information, a certain product, a non-data product or service, and they want to understand what kind of data they require. So it's customer provided data. They then go ahead and look at the key activities, how they're going to utilize the data. They analyze the data that they're going to get from the customer, and then they monetize them via advertising, right? They need to watch out for data privacy. They need to watch out for cultural problems. So, for example, not to, do I don't know, alcohol to people that don't drink alcohol or something like that. But basically, that is one way on how to define a use case. And what you would typically do is you would create a higher level use case. Say, for example, you want to innovate your product portfolio, right? And then you have a subset of various use cases that are underneath that high level use case that you can then be very specific about what your data sources are and how you actually going to tackle the problem. So you can look at the use cases here yourself. So I'm not going to read all of them to you, but it's basically important that there is a different set of data sources that you can actually work with. Sometimes it's freely available. It's open information. Sometimes it's an opted-in information set, and sometimes it's something that you buy. And I've seen some weird stuff in terms of non-compliance with data privacy rules, but that is a topic for another conversation. Yeah. So one of the case studies that I wanted to talk to you about really briefly today was the work that I've done a couple of years ago for Danone. And Danone had a problem, and the problem was that they had a whole bunch of data in their R&D system, but they really didn't know what to do with it. They had data also in all sorts of places. They had data in written on paper. They had data stored on the local machines. They had data stored on the central server and the cloud and various clouds and various systems, and ERP systems and CRM systems, etc., right? And it was a complete and utter nightmare to actually, first of all, figure out where the data was, then figure out what they actually wanted to do with it, and then figure out how they actually created value out of that. Not just once they knew what kind of use cases they wanted to work on, they also needed to figure out what the value of these use cases was. And they needed to do that pretty much up front, otherwise nobody would have gone for any of the use cases. So the big challenges, like I said, was that there was no common technology stack. The stuff was everywhere. Then we had 600 users in the R&D division, and they were mainly non-techies. They were, anything from lab assistants, biologists, business managers, project managers, all sorts of people. And all of these people had different requirements and different needs. And it was obviously a very different requirements and needs, right? So you'd always have to define the use cases in a way that it can relate back to their position. Because I firmly believe that you always need to find the intrinsic motivation within any individual in any organization in order to make sure that they are supportive of the effort, or otherwise they'll just be like, what does it matter to me? I really don't care. I'm just a biologist. Why do I care about data? So you need to tie that use case back to the person and explain why they should care and how that matters. And then prove the business case basically by switching it live, by doing it, using a subset of data and conducting it. And the fun thing is that the proving of the business case is very often quite simple. It seems very daunting in the beginning, but ultimately, it very often turns out that you only need a very limited amount of data to prove the business case. So how we did it was actually, and how it is done, it's not just we who did it like that, but how it can be done by many, is you start with an innovation workshop. Obviously, you get together, you do an internal hackathon, you basically hack your own business, something along those lines. Do a little bit of design thinking, you combine various innovation methodologies, and then you put on top of it, you put a whole lot of research, ideally working together with academia, asking academia to do some more research on custom behavior, on certain consumption patterns, etc. Then you define the solution stack. You need to do that quite early on because you need to understand what you have and what you can work with. At the same time or directly afterwards, you define the use cases, as I said, and the use cases always need to be very, very business focused and simplistic. Otherwise, you cannot communicate the value of the use case throughout the organization. Then you create a pilot. Basically, you switch that on, the use case. You create a little bit of data insights by collecting a subset of data, because otherwise, you can spend an eternity on actually cleaning all the data in an organization, gathering all the data, then cleaning all the data, making it work. And then at the end, you'll figure out that you only really need 1%, 2% of the data, right? And then you create a business case out of that. And ultimately, you're able to then, once the business case works and you were able to sell it to the powers to be, you can then start and scale it. So that was our solution. So there were a number of results that we created out of that. And the biggest one was probably that when you do, for example, Danone doesn't only do yogurt, but yogurt is a simple example to explain. If you do yogurt, you have certain yogurt strains. You need to go through clinical trials, and you need to make sure that these clinical trials are okay. You need to collect the feedback from the clinical trials, and then you iterate. You go per strain, you iterate, and ultimately you'll have a subset that works and that you can then use to improve your Actimel or whatever, right? That information for the clinical trials that was gathered in the clinical trials, that was mainly already existing. They had that somewhere on paper in the minds of people, on computers, and in the different places. And it was a question of really articulating the use case very concisely so that you were able to use the existing data, look for the existing data, and then use a subset of the existing data to actually answer the questions that they had along the R&D process. And like it says here, right, the previous development of a product, you had typically a development period in R&D of 9 months, and we could cut that down to 2 days. So if you're able to create a new product, to launch a new product with 2 days of research rather than 9 months of research, you are really agile, you are really flexible, and you have a huge advantage over the competition. And after we've done that, obviously, that was quite a stir. People were quite fascinated. We could then add to that, and we could then add other dimensions to that. So we used clinical data that was external data that we then added, so we were able to actually create customized products for the various regions. Previously, that wouldn't have been possible because you can't create one for, say, the Mediterranean rim, where people eat a lot of oil and have a different gut system. So you needed something else. You needed different tests, and that was previously not possible. And after reduction from 9 months to 2 days, you could play around with thoughts like that. You could actually have subsets of groups of people and create something that was almost individualized. That is still in the rollout process, and I hope I haven't given anything away here, but we were quite proud, obviously, for that reduction, saving a lot of time. So the important bit is here that you find something that really truly matters, and that's not just white noise. There's so much noise out there, and the relevant data set is very, very, very little, very small. So I give you another example really briefly. Friends of mine do energy savings and data management solutions for big corporate buildings, and they found out, after a lot of research, after a lot of data intake, after a lot of analysis, they found out that they need exactly one single data point to figure out the forecasted consumption of energy, waste, and water in any office building. They needed exactly one data point. If you ask me later on what the data point was, I'll happily tell you. So find what matters, and don't get confused by the noise that's out there. That's a big thing. So in the next breakout, it's like, what business problems are you struggling with? I would like you to think about it. What keeps you up at night? What really, what worries you right now, right? And then what would you need to know? What kind of questions would you need to ask and get answered in order to solve that problem. So think about your business not scaling quickly enough, not having enough customers, not, I don't know, whatever the problem is, whatever the question is, maybe quality concerns or whatever. I am pretty convinced that 99% of these challenges are somehow solvable with the right use of data and information. And the next question then is how can you get that information? What would you need to set up in order to get that information to solve your business problem?
So what is AI? AI really is a branch of computer science, and it's been around for some time right now. It has a very specific goal, and the goal is to create intelligent systems. Machine learning is an AI derivative or subcategory, but the machine learning is not AI. And very often I find that people that have an interesting algorithm in machine learning, they classify this as pure AI, which I don't think it is, because as it states here, it says it's an intelligent system that functions independently, and machine learning doesn't typically function independently. It always requires an algorithm, and it very frequently requires someone nurturing the algorithm. So buyer beware is all I'm saying. When somebody tries to hoodwink you with the latest, greatest AI solution, very often it is only a partial solution that isn't independently or particularly smart. I think it's going to be quite interesting when we have a whole lot of self-driving cars in the cities. I think you can just walk across the street and not really watch out for cars anymore at all, because they're all going to be programmed to not hurt you. And as long as they don't hurt their occupants by not hurting you, um, but I'd be interested in your thoughts. What are the biggest risks with AI? Are you actually looking forward to singularity? And make no mistake, singularity is coming, right? Machines are already on the verge of it. They are getting smarter and smarter, and they've probably outsmarted us already. So what are the risks you see, but also what are the opportunities you see? Maybe you are someone that likes the prospect of, painting pictures and composing music exclusively, not having to worry about where the food comes from in the future. I'm not judging. I'm genuinely asking, what are the opportunities you see with AI, and how would you enhance Asimov's laws to actually fit the 21st century? Fantastic. So yeah, folks, this is I find these topics super interesting. Democratization in the context of equality, and AI is not half as difficult as one thinks. Actually, to create machine learning algorithms is something that my 17-year-old son, who's learned Python now for I don't know what, maybe half a year. He can now create machine learning algorithms. It's really not, and he doesn't do that full time. He goes to school full time, so not really that difficult, but very exciting if you combine these various topics together. So, thanks to Eve and thanks to Gabi and the team behind this event to actually bring up this topic, because I think it's very relevant. It's very timely as well. Timely and relevant also because I'd like to look at the bigger picture, the macro context, right? There's this famous saying, if in doubt, zoom out. So if you're not quite certain what the information, the data set or whatever tells you, it's just like go up one level. Don't look at the detail, look at the woods and not the tree. So we are in a time where we have volatility, where we have uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. This VUCA time is something that we're all experiencing, and it's not something that you are just experiencing in your job. You have to imagine, if you are the C-level person in the Fortune 500 company these days, you typically are probably, I don't know, somewhere between 40 and 60, maybe older. So you're not a millennial, you're not a digital native. You are at the very, very end of your career typically, and you are at the very end, at the very limit of your skill set. I mean, yes, you probably have very smart people around you that can help you, but if you're really honest, and I've had a few honest, hands-down conversations with Fortune 500 C-level folks, they're scared. They're scared. They are not exactly sure where this is going, and they have a lot of questions. And one of the biggest problems is that they can't ask the questions within their team because they can't out themselves as not knowing something. Only the most mature people can actually do that and can say, like, guys, I don't know. I have no clue. Please help me, smarten me up on that topic. And the problem is that that doesn't get less. We're having the speed of change is constantly accelerating throughout whatever topic, whether it is a single technology, whether it is technology as a whole, whatever it is, globalization, market shifts, market dynamics, the way how markets move. It's changing, not linear, not as it used to be, but it's changing exponentially. All of that. And if you look at some of these things here, I mean, we're going to fly to Mars. We're going to have cars that are going to drive us. Uber is replacing all the drivers with AIs. And that's just mobility. That's only mobility, right? And then we have other industries that are equally as disrupted. And that is not linear. That is not gradually changing. That is changing at the speed of light. It's insane. And of course, much of that is down to Moore's law. It's, the acceleration and the fact that stuff isn't that expensive anymore. I got here one of these VR headsets, right? That Oculus, and that thing, I'd say 5 years ago that would have been a few £1,000. 10 years ago that would have been military use only, and now it's £300, £250, right? It's crazy, and the computing power in this headset alone is probably more than was used to fly to the moon. So that is something that is also exponentially. Moore's law is increasing the speed of change furthermore. Now, we have converging technologies on the exponential curve, and these technologies that you see here are all interdependent and relating to one another, right? So whether it's AI, whether it's what we're doing right now, whether it's virtual reality, augmented reality, all of these things are coming together, right? Blockchain is going to be woven into these systems as, you want to say, a standalone decentralization paradigm that is going to change how we're going to do things, do business going forward. And we've talked with Frust, with one of the sponsors of this event, and thank you very much for this great experience, Frank and the team, if you listen. We've talked quite a bit about what the future will be.
And by the way, you touched my heart with your question. We're talking Isaac Asimov, and absolutely one of my biggest crushes from a science fiction novelist perspective. And I think one of the things you talked about here is Moore's law, and it also goes into quantum that I want to get into with AI. That Moore's law is really reaching its physical limits, not its potential limits, right? So at some point here in the near future, we've actually talked about that Moore's law will break down. And I've heard many people talk about that. But quantum AI and its ability to do more accurate and even more complex predictions is something that I'm fascinated about, and I think is something that we're going to be talking about in the next 5 years, even though it's not quite there yet. But you can even still do stuff on that perspective. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on where that's going on quantum
AI. So there's quantum is, so I'm not the expert on quantum AI. I don't know exactly where this is going to go, right? Other than this is definitely having a massive impact. Quantum computing in combination with machine learning algorithms it's going to dramatically change how everything works. But they're already having the next technology post quantum now, which is proton alignments, right? So they're already having the next technology now, which is coming up. And I'm not quite so certain that Moore's law will break down. I've read these articles, but I believe in the ingenuity of humans, and specifically, we're going to be augmented by AI. So we're not just going to be human inventors in a lab as we used to be, but we're now going to be man and machine, or women and machine together. And that, I think, will help us invent and break down boundaries that previously were there, to a point where a philosophical discussion will evolve. What the evolution of the human race ultimately should look like, right? And that's, I think, something to be figured out, probably for my son.
Yeah,
I don't know, right? I mean, I quoted Harari a few times, and of course he's a bit of a populist anthropologist, but still at the same time he has some interesting books. And if you haven't read 21st Ideas for the 21st Century or Homo Deus, then you should probably go back and have a look at that, because I'm sure you have, Frank. But if the audience hasn't, then that's certainly worth thinking about, because I think that's the philosophical questions that need to be solved first, before we then address the business questions after that. So, as I just said, or what I was about to say, we're now talking about the integration of blockchain-based systems, whether it's social tokens, whether it's loyalty programs. So there's a whole lot of things that are changing from an ecosphere perspective. I don't think that system is quite enough anymore, because it's two-dimensional. I think we're going multi-dimensional now. And that again is something where AI is really good, because it actually is much better at interpreting multi-dimensions than humans are. So just understanding complexity and correlation, right? So I'm going back here, and just there are some tools that I think come from and you heard me talk about philosophy before, so I'm going to touch again on some Hegel's ideas of internal and external perspectives of the individual or the group. And what you can simplify those as is that if you look at the right mindset, if you analyze the status quo and the possibilities, if you create a certain culture and have the systems that support you to work to make that change happen, then you're actually on the right track, in our opinion. And I'm not going to go in every one of these components in detail. Some of them are actually, humongous from a discussions perspective, like systems, for example, or culture. But I can talk very briefly about mindset. And the most important thing here is that you need to understand what exponential mindset means and why it doesn't work anymore. Because the thing is, we're accelerating dramatically. We're accelerating exponentially, not linear, as we previously discussed, right? And this is pretty much, we're ending up at some place where we did not expect to end up in. And we need to plan for that. And if you want to plan for that somehow, you need to put in a certain level of agility, whether you use the Kawasaki method, where you only test and trial and A/B test, and then use the bit that works better and never put all your eggs in one basket, or whether you use any other method. The main point is that be prepared to actually ride that black swan when it comes along, because it will come along, and plan for the unplannable as much as you possibly can. Right. So if I just take this as an example, very briefly, the iPhone 1, as you can clearly identify here in the back, for the ones of you that are my age, you'll see that that was the first iPhone that I actually bought when I was in New York 12, 13 years ago, when the first iPhone came out. And I thought about all these things that I'm going to do with the phone, because my computer broke down and I needed something. So I went to the Apple store and then got it hacked into so that it actually would take my German SIM card. And then I thought of all the beautiful things I would be able to do with it, right? I would be able to run my emails. I would be able to browse the internet. I would be able to find a certain location. I could chat with it. I could time my walks. I could have a little bit of a pocket calculator with me. But and maybe weather. Yeah, I think weather was there as well. And then some very simple YouTube thingy that worked. So that was everything I could imagine. And then I was thinking, maybe in the future, at some point, I might be able to do banking on it, or I might be able to have video calls with friends and family in far off places that aren't costing me an arm and a leg anymore. And you know what? All of those things that I imagined, and I was always in the innovation and disruptive tech space, all the things I imagined happened. And not only did all of these things happen that I could imagine, but 100 times more things that I didn't even think about. And that's the fact that you need to accept that everything you will be able to imagine right now is going to happen in a shorter time frame than you can possibly imagine right now. That's the crazy bit, and that's what you require from an acceptance perspective in order to be able to plan for the inevitable and to actually plan for these black swan events and the unplannable. So the thing I would like to leave you with is ultimately, as a homework, really think about these things that are ripe for disruption, and think about the industries that are ripe for disruption, right? You have financial services, communications, energy, cities, all these things that are ripe for disruption. Write down what you think will happen. Just as an exercise, maybe just write it down for the next year or next 5 years. Write down what you think is going to happen and then put timelines next to them. And revisit that piece of paper every now so often, piece of paper or document in a computer or whatever you use. It doesn't need to be paper based. And then revisit it, put it somewhere safe and revisit it every now so often. And what you will see is that whatever you think is going to happen will happen quicker than you imagine and much more dramatic and much more as foundational change. So that's the interesting bit. So just to wrap it up, I think it is important if you shift to that exponential mindset that you try to understand that you need to get out of the confirmation and the plan continuation bias. So it's also sometimes referenced as the echo chamber, and you hear the things you want to hear. You don't listen to other ideas anymore. So try and stay as open-minded as you possibly can, accepting the fact that you have a confirmation and a plan continuation bias, and be constantly willing and able to question yourself and whether you are already right, whether you're still on the right track. And the way how you can do this is you can engineer diversity. I think I'm a firm believer. One of the main reasons why I moved to London was because I love the diversity of the city, and I believe in diversity being the cornerstone of creativity, and creativity being the one thing that will ultimately help us in the future to actually differentiate us as humans. Do contrarian exercises, self-disruption. Like question yourself. Create a team within your organization that hacks your organization deliberately. Creates a competitor that completely and utterly destroys it, and then learn from that experience and be open about it. Be open about the risks involved, the potential dangers, etc., and become much more agile because there's so many hungry people out there right now. You're competing on a global level, and people are really hungry and they're really driven and they're really motivated. And it only takes one entrepreneur to disrupt one of the business lines from a huge bank. HSBC, for example, the head of innovation told me a few years ago that he knows that HSBC is not going to be around 10 years later. That was about 2 or 3 years ago, because he said, we have maybe 20 profitable business lines. And one of these business lines, say, for example, international money transfer, is going to be torpedoed by 50, 100 startups per year. And it only takes one to be successful. And that's their business line gone. So if you're HSBC, you need to make sure that you are yourself the disruptor. You are the innovator in that space. And you use all the disruptive technology, all the data, all the information you have, except the fact that you need to think exponentially and then work on hacking yourselves, basically. So digital leadership, future-proofing essential components are understanding the world that we're in. Look at your industry, but don't only look at your industry, also look at competitors in other industries, look at other industries in general. So if you're telecoms, look at energy services, for example. If you're a software producer, look at manufacturing. I mean, there's so much to be learned from other industries where they've already made some experiences or errors in the past that you can now prevent, not having to anymore. Look at your customers, be customer driven, obviously. Look at the value sphere, as I said earlier. Make the data and analytics driven decisions a top priority in your management team. Really show leadership and innovation. It's super important, because if you don't constantly innovate, you're stuck. You're not going to go anywhere. As a company, you'll have your Kodak moment long past. Write those black swans, like I said. Organize yourselves better. Choose the best initiatives. Create continuous evolution, and then you'll hopefully have the possibility to combine these insights and the understanding with the right level of sovereignty, with the right amount of equality, and there is no righter amount of equality than total equality, and ultimately are able to do things in a better way than before. So that is very much where I think that you are all tasked now to be bloody bold. Sorry, I can't say that often enough. The things will fail because people aren't bold enough and don't dare to make decisions. And we've seen that with Musk. It helps if you have one crazy person at the helm that just does stuff, does crazy out there stuff, but is bold and gutsy and goes for it. despite the fact that people tell me, the car industry can't be disrupted. And there you go, you have a software business now running the whole automotive sector. So don't put your head in the sand. Don't think this is going to go over and pass you. This will definitely happen, and you can be a part of the solution or become irrelevant. It's that dramatic, in my opinion. Any questions?
I'm here to actually shake the audience. It's an opportunity to ask your questions. Don't sleep, get your coffee, but still come back and ask that question, because maybe it's a one-in-a-lifetime opportunity to, ask a question in virtual reality, because you can always get connected to Florian, right? LinkedIn is there. All right, come to the beach. Let's continue the talks, get to know each other, share the thoughts and ideas. And before we step out and go to the beach, I would like to say a huge thank you. Please do hit on the C button to clap and applaud for Florian's wonderful, wonderful presentation, sharing the depths of thoughts and the expertise. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to the team. I see Gabi Slezak already dancing. She was the one to launch and explain how Navatar work. Andrea was on the screen, who is the InnoHUB program lead. Posha Javaheri, she is in the audience. Then we have also Ramona Parkin, Robin Verhoeven, and we also have on our team, do I see her? No, not in the audience, but Inga Thyssen. We work with two teams, Evenness and Women in AI, Oliviana Bailey as well, and Farah Shaka. So thank you to the teams, and a big thank you to Fru's wonderful, amazing environment. Thank you for hosting us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was. I mean, Frank. First of all, thank you for setting up this entire environment together with the team at Evening. Right, I think this is working tremendously well, and